Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're turning our attention specifically to the book of Job, chapter 35.
Right.
We're jumping in right as this new voice, Elihu, finally steps forward. He's been quiet, listening, and now he's about to challenge Job.
Yeah, challenge his whole perspective on suffering, on righteousness, and, how our actions even relate to God.
It's quite the entrance.
It really is. And what's fascinating is how Elihu gets right to the heart of Job's earlier arguments. Job felt wronged, even asking if there's any real profit in not sinning, because, look, he's suffering anyway.
Right, the what's the point argument.
Exactly. And Elihu seems to, push back on that whole framework. He's almost saying, hold up, let's reconsider what's actually going on when humans act or don't act.
And he kicks it off with this amazing call for perspective, telling Job, look up at the heavens and see, gaze at the clouds so high above you. It doesn't feel like just poetic language, does it? It feels like he's setting the stage for argument about scale.
Absolutely. Scale is a great word for it. Elihu immediately puts God on this totally different plane. He's suggesting that from way up there, human actions, your sin, your righteousness, they don't fundamentally change God. They don't really affect him in the sense of altering his being.
Right.
And your righteousness doesn't give to him as if God was somehow lacking something that you could provide.
Okay, let's pause on that, because that's a pretty sharp turn from the back and forth we've seen. So Elihu's argument is essentially that our wickedness, it affects only a man like yourself.
Right.
And our righteousness, it only affects the sons of men. So he's saying the real punch, the real impact of our choices is felt down here between us.
Person to person. It's more of a horizontal effect, you could say, not this vertical transaction that forces God's hand or changes his mood or his status. He's subtly trying to dismantle that idea, I think, that suffering is always a direct ledger entry with God based on your personal sin or goodness, at least not in the tit-for-tat way Job and his friends were arguing.
So the consequences are real, but they unfold here in the human realm.
That's what he seems to imply, yeah. Within the human sphere.
Okay, so if our actions don't directly change the Almighty, then Elihu addresses that other big question. Why does it feel like people cry out in pain and nothing? Silence.
Right. He sees it. He acknowledges that men cry out under a load of oppression. That's real.
But then there's a twist.
There is. He says, essentially, but no one says, where is God, my maker, who gives songs in the night?
Wow. Songs in the night. What do you think he means by that specific lack?
Well, Elihu isn't denying the cries, but he sees something missing. The cries seem focused on the oppression, on the oppressor, just wanting the external pressure to stop.
Relief-focused.
Exactly. They aren't, in Elihu's view anyway, primarily cries seeking God himself within the suffering, seeking the one who could potentially give comfort or perspective or, songs, even in the darkest times.
So from Elihu's angle here, the perceived silence from God isn't necessarily God not hearing. It might be about the nature of the plea itself.
That seems to be his argument. He suggests it could be an empty plea, maybe driven by the arrogance of the wicked, or maybe just focused entirely on relief from human problems rather than connection with the divine maker.
He's challenging Job's complaint that God isn't noticing injustice, implying God's timing and methods aren't bound by our expectations of immediate, visible intervention.
Yeah, he's basically saying God doesn't operate according to human schedules or demands for immediate justice or notice. The seeking itself might be off target. And Elihu, he doesn't exactly soften the blow. He concludes that Job's words, in this specific context, are empty talk without knowledge.
Oof. Yeah, he certainly doesn't pull punches. Okay, so let's recap Elihu's main challenge here in chapter 35. First, your actions. They primarily impact other people, not God directly.
Right, the horizontal effect.
Second, when people cry out under oppression, are they just seeking relief from the human situation, or are they truly seeking God himself?
The where is God, my maker question.
And third, if God seems silent, maybe it's because the plea is empty or arrogant, or because God operates on his own terms, not ours.
And that Job's complaints at this point are missing this crucial perspective.
Right. So here's something for you listening to maybe chew on. How does this viewpoint from Elihu, this idea that our actions mostly affect each other, and that seeking God himself is different from just crying out against suffering, how does that challenge the common ways we might think about asking for divine help, or how we try to understand those times when God feels distant or silent?
It's definitely a perspective that shifts the focus, doesn't it? From demanding answers about the problem to seeking connection with the person.
A powerful reframe indeed. Something to think about.